Any questions or like, what was the hardest part?
Just using the machine.
Using the machine on the
there's
person?
hair.
Okay. There's hair and then you can't see,
Yeah.
or there's hair and then you don't know how much pigment to put because you can't tell what's light, what's dark.
I think it was the outline that threw me off. Like I couldn't see the outline.
Okay, you couldn't see the outline very well. If you couldn't see what I did for the outline, then when you do it yourself, do it a little bit darker, right? Go a little bit darker. She could have gone a little bit darker, which would have been fine. The outline, you're looking for like dots that are together. Even if there's hair, you can still see there was a line. So it just over time training yourself to see what does a tattoo dot look like versus when there's no dot, right? That takes time to see. So in the future, when you do your own models, do a little bit more for the outline. What else?
And just stretching for me, it was
Hard. Yes.
hard. I need
Yes.
to, get.
I mean, first of all, like your fingers don't have the muscles for it yet. It's still gonna develop as you are learning. So go home, stretch all of your friends. Stretch your husband. Just tell him to lay down and stretch their skin. One thing I just want you to be aware of, if this is the portion that you want to tattoo, your stretch should always be just a little bit out of where you're trying to do. So don't be like stretching here when you're trying to aim for this portion, and then you never change your stretch and you just keep moving your needles. Just be consistent. Stretch like this. The smaller part you stretch, the more you don't have to use your finger muscles to be like because then you're just stretching a small space. To stretch something so tight, being so far away, you need to use a lot more muscle. So just do small things at once and just be very consistent. Like, if this is what I'm stretching, this is what I'm doing. You don't use the full thing here and here to stretch. Or I know you like to use this finger. Use more of all this surface space to stretch, not just the tip of it, right? When I stretch, I'm like, I might as well just go like this to them, but it's more so like that, right? This entire portion is on their skin. This will give you the flattest surface to work with, okay? Once the outline is there, you can stretch through their eyebrows. You don't have to avoid anything anymore. Because when I saw you stretch, you still kind of like, you don't stretch certain parts, and I'm like, but you can just like really go through all the eyebrows, okay? Yeah. And the pinky, obviously, be mindful. This is kind of wiping away this way as your fingers moving. So that takes time to master. So just do it to yourself. Or is your finger actively pulling away? You see how my skin is, see how it's pulling away? And then I'm moving. Though you see my pinky doesn't move? I'm not loosening and going like this over time. Does that make sense? So keep practicing. You can practice on your own arm so you can see it. Yeah, so do this at home. I don't want to see you doing over time. It's already back here. Because I see you going like this, pushing like this.
Yeah, and it's really hard to put the ink because the skin is all like
Once the skin is no longer completely flat, it's hard to get pigment in. Right? I told you like why do we stretch so damn hard is because if it's not flat, no pigment goes in. It hits the skin, it bounces back. The needle bounces back. Every little portion is something you have to basically master. Like when I first started, I was like, oh my god, even the mapping was so hard. The mapping has to be really, really clean, okay? I don't want any jagged edges because our needle is so thin. Any jagged edge is gonna pick it up and you're gonna follow it because your brain is just gonna follow it as you tattoo. So if your outline is like this, dips down even just a little bit, your eyebrow's gonna come out, dip down a little bit, okay? So just be very clean and precise with your outline when you see the eyebrow. Yes, what else? Anything else?
Mapping the brows, I had to go more natural.
Okay,
because
so
she was scared when she saw it. She was like, oh.
yeah, so like when you mapped her eyebrow, if there was outline, very precisely you can see the outline, that's gonna freak her out, especially when she said so many times, like, I want a really, really natural eyebrow, right? So when they see that, so you just have to be mindful. What I typically do when I map is, if I add a little bit of pigment in their skin, I right away use a spoolie, brush it out. I don't ever have like a harsh line, and then try to like, blend it out, because the line will always look very dark. So I add a little bit pigment, brush it out, add a little bit pigment, brush it out, move on to the tail. It's okay if the tail's a little bit darker, because that's the whole incentive. So what I would advise is, before you show them, don't just be like, so what do you think, right? Before you show them, prep them. Be like, just so you know, before I show you, your brow is going to be not this dark when it's healed. It's gonna shrink just a little bit. Also, if you do see an outline right now, you're not gonna see a distinctive outline when everything's healed. It's gonna be super blended. Tell them before you show it to them, so they're not like, huh? No, I can't do this. This is way too much. Does that make sense? Always prep them every step forward. Just like when I say, when they lay down, before you're gonna open their skin, prep them about like, okay, so we're gonna start the tattooing process. From this point on, it takes about, for me, it takes about 1 hour. For you, it may take 1.5 hours to 2 hours. But just mentally prep them so they feel very at ease with you, right? Okay.
Okay, and if a client has like uneven brows, do I, like basically one higher and one lower, do you usually take the lower one up? Do you get what I mean?
Yes, I usually do in between both of them. So if this is the lower one, this is the higher one, I lower the higher one a little bit, I raise this one up a little bit. I typically don't just find one higher one and copy the lower one exactly like the higher one, because you're gonna end up having her remove a lot of her hair that's too low. And sometimes people are gonna think like, that's too much of a maintenance for me. Why do I have to keep removing my hair every like 2 months or every month, right? Like the reason why I wanna get this procedure done is so that I don't have to worry about my eyebrows. So do whatever you think that would be the lowest maintenance for them. That's why I always say, follow their hair as much as possible, that they still look even, symmetrical. There are clients that I had to kind of up one tail that's not completely in their hairline, because otherwise it looks too not symmetrical, right? And those are the clients that they already know, like, the reason I want to come and get this done is because I want my brows to be very, very symmetrical. And so they understand that they have to maintain their hair, like take some hair off when it grows out. That's something they have to do every month or two. Yeah, but that's why the consulting process is so important, right? You make it very clear, like, hey, your eyebrows are very not symmetrical, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm going to make your lower eyebrow slightly higher, your higher eyebrow slightly lower. So when the brow hair grows out from this one, you need to take away the hair on top. When the lower one hair grows, the lower portion grows out, take away. Otherwise, you're gonna have very thick looking eyebrows, right? So let them know. Communication with your client is like the key to keeping them for the rest of their life. Yeah. Did you feel good? Like you understand the feeling when the needle hits the skin and there's that slight vibration and then you hear it a little bit? Whenever you don't hear it, the vibration is less, isn't it? Even when you feel it. So note that when you don't hear it and that less vibration just means you're not even penetrating the skin. So the whole point of this exercise, or the whole point of model day really, is just for you to feel what's the correct vibration. Everything else just comes with time that you need to keep practicing. But the vibration you're never gonna feel unless somebody's there to tell you that's the correct vibration. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel like I press really hard and you could hear it.
And then you go,
Yeah.
and then when I show you, I'm like, push away her pigment, and I'm like, do you see that? Really, like, you see that line that's there? That's the deep vibration sound you just heard. So that's why it's important that I'm right there looking at you, because I'm like, do you hear that sound? You wipe away the pigment, really soft pixels, fantastic. That's what you're aiming for every single time. And then when you accidentally hit it too deep, even you recognize like, oh my God, I think I hit it too deep. We wipe it away. There's that more darker line that forms, and what that means is all the pigment around it will have to have the same amount of saturation as that one line that you just added. Does that make sense? So it's hard for you to blend everything out if everything is so dark, right? Yeah, that's what model day is for. Like, I wouldn't beat yourself up for it and be like, oh my God, I don't think I could have done this, blah, blah, blah. That's the whole point. The whole point is just for you to understand the correct depth, and that's it. Everything else, it just takes time for you to practice. Like, you need to consistently be able to achieve this with all of your eyebrows, and not just one side. The main goal is you can do exactly the same pigmentation on the other eyebrow. Right? So right now we're only doing one eyebrow, but when you go home and practice, I want you to do sets of eyebrow that has the same saturation. So which means is if it's light here, make sure the other side is also light, then it gradually builds up. So yeah, so that's what ombre powder brow is. If this eyebrow is slightly darker here and this one is lighter, it's gonna throw off how it looks visually, okay? So the point is, two identical looking eyebrows, okay? And building the pigment where you don't see any like light, dark, right? Everything just looks from either light to dark, or sometimes people do light on top, dark at the bottom. Either way is fine, as long as there's a very nice gradual transition of color and nothing is like, oh, I can see exactly where that one stroke started and that one stroke ended. That's the whole point. So you gotta really practice this a lot. I think when I first started, I did a few hours a day, just pad work, right? Then you move on to stretching people's skin. Like, just get used to people laying there and you're always touching their skin with your machine, right? And focus on when you stretch their skin, this pinky is actively pushing away their skin. So I don't wanna see any folding of the skin. Like, I don't want to see this, right, while you work. Everything is just super pulled away, okay? Once you master those, how it feels, then take on your first few models. I think a lot of times when people don't do well on their models right away is because they go into it without practicing all this that much. They feel like, okay, I could do this on a pad. Let me go do a person. When you do a person on a 3D face without the correct stretch, you are never going to be able to produce this, right? Because right now, this is the assumption that everything is flat, everything is stretched out for you. When you do a person, you actively, like 80% of your work is really the stretch. So if you don't master the stretch, you can't do this on a real life person. Does that make sense? And the stretch, not only it's tight, I want you to be aware which position it's leaning. That's what people don't like see sometimes, right? They're so focused on like, oh, this is really, really tight, but then their angle is going at a weird angle, you know? So then they don't even implant ink into it if it's not close to a 90 degrees, okay? And also slow down. Don't do super fast. The slower you go, the more pigment you're gonna implant, okay? Yeah. What else? Yeah, what else? So before you do a model, you know how like we went through all the like do this, do that second. Have that game plan in your head already, so you're not flustered. Almost like a replay, like a movie in your head all the time. Like, okay, this is what I do before I touch a person. This is what I do before. Have it just memorized basically at that point. So you can use your husband as a mock person all the time. So you get all the steps down. Because if you get flustered, like, oh my God, what do I do next? What do I do next? You're gonna screw up on everything. everything because you're too flustered to do a good job. Okay, the key is to be just very present at what you're doing. If you're having a conversation, really listen to what they're telling you and what they need from you, right? So for example, you know how when you first went in and you had a real dark border for the pre-draw, it was a really dark pre-draw. But did you hear her before she told you about her eyebrows? She said like, oh, it was so natural. I only just kind of filled in the ends. Mm-hmm. What you could have done when you heard that is your pre-draw. You could have just like fill in her ends a little bit more, give her more of a tail definition, right? Maybe just the beginning, like do this and brush it over. Do this, brush it over. So it's the same. The width of the eyebrow is the same as her natural brow hair, but it's very light in color. And you just darken her tail just a little bit more, and then use a spoolie to even everything out, and then show it to her because that's something she's used to. That's something she's like, oh, that's what I'm looking for. And if the pre-draw that you show her is like nothing from where she usually does it, you're not gonna get an okay from her very fast. Does that make sense? Yeah. For example though, if you got a girl today, that model, that she likes to do a lot of makeup, the pre-draw that you showed her, that border and it's dark, she would have been like, oh yeah, I love this. This is on fleek. Like this is what I like to do all the time. She would say yes a long time to you, a long time ago to you. Does that make sense? Yeah, so sometimes you're great, but there are students who use mapping where it's just all lines, and then they show their clients with all the lines on their face. Like, what is the client's gonna be like, what am I looking at? I don't even know what I'm looking at, right? So I always say be mindful. Basically, like think of yourself as the client. How would you feel if you did that to your client?